Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of JoyBaking.com. Today we're going to make sausage and potato turnovers, and this is what it looks like. On the outside we're using puff pastry, so it's buttery, it's crisp, it's flaky, and then inside our filling is sausage and onion and potato. Really good. So we're going to start with our puff pastry. You will need, this recipe makes 12 turnovers. You can scale that up or down. You'll see it's very easy to scale. And we're going to make 12, so we will need 1 pound, which is 450 grams of puff pastry. Now, you can use homemade or store-bought. If you're using store-bought, normally in the freezer section, you can buy a box. It's about 17 ounces, which is 480 grams with 2 sheets. That's perfect for this recipe. And you want to defrost your puff pastry overnight in the refrigerator. But today we are going to make, or I'm going to use, homemade puff pastry. Actually, it's a blitz, or what you would call a quick puff pastry. A little easier to make than the standard one, but the results are just as good. And if you go to the JoyBaking.com website, I have a recipe and a video on how to make blitz puff pastry. I do recommend you try that. And the good thing is you can make your puff a couple days before you actually assemble your turnovers. Now we're going to work with a half a pound, 225 grams at a time, which will give us 6. So, and that would be 1 sheet if you're using the store-bought puff. So flour your surface. When you're working with puff, you want to keep it cold. So you don't want the butter in the layers to melt. I'm just going to soften it. Mine's cold from the fridge. And then what we're going to do is roll this into a rectangle that's just a slight bit bigger than 9 by 13.5 inches, which is 23 by 34.5 centimeters. We have to trim the edges of our puff. That's why we're going to roll it just a little more than that amount. So whenever you're rolling, this is like any pastry, you want to keep lifting and turning to make sure it's not sticking. If it sticks, use more flour. If you find your puff is getting too soft, I would stop and refrigerate it until it firms up. Okay, so that's about the right size. Just lift it up. Make sure it's not springing back. If you're rolling in it and when you roll out and it springs back too much, I would stop and refrigerate it for a little bit. It's getting too soft. So now what we want to do is cut the edges off. And the reason we do that is so when we bake our puff pastry, you can it puffs up and you can see all the layers. That's why you cut off the ends. So I'm using just a pizza cutter. You could just use a knife. If you're using a knife, don't like kind of saw, go straight down. But if you have one of these, makes quick work of it. So, like I said, I wanted to get my ruler. You need a ruler for this. I want 9 inches. Over there. Mark that. We do have to be precise here. We want all of our turnovers the same size. Put that out of the way. Okay, that's about 9. And then we need 13.5, which is 34.5 centimeters. That one. Okay. And there we go. I'm a little short on this end, so I'm just going to roll. Don't roll over the ends because we've already cut them. There we go. So now we want to divide in half lengthwise, which would be at, since this is 9, we're going 4.5, which would be 11 centimeters. And then we're going to divide each one of these into thirds. Okay, so once you do that, what we're going to do is put them on a parchment-lined baking sheet and cover them and put them into the refrigerator to chill while we make our fillings. So that's what we'll do when we come back. So now for our filling, you will need a skillet. I'm going to put that on medium-high heat. And I'm going to add just a little bit of oil. I'm just using an olive oil. And that warms up. We are going to cook a half a pound, which is 225 grams of Italian sausage. I like mine spicy, that hot and spicy Italian sausage. You could use mild. Actually, you could use any kind of sausage you want. So I'm just going to let that heat up. And if you buy it in the casings, you want to take it out of that. Okay, that's feeling pretty hot. I'm going to add the sausage. And then we're just going to cook this completely through. Okay, so that's cooked through. I'm going to remove it from the heat. Now I have just a plate, and I've put some paper towel on there. I find the sausage is very fatty, so I want to get rid of some of that. Just put it. There we go. Put that back on the heat, and then what I do is just take another piece of paper towel and blot out and get that fat. So just put that aside. And now what I'm going to do is turn this back on medium-high. We are going to cook our onions and potatoes. So actually, I like a little bit of butter. So maybe half a tablespoon, about 6 grams, and a little olive oil. If you don't want to use the butter, you can just use the olive oil. Melt that. And so what I have is one just small onion, and I finely chopped it. You know, great thing about when you cook, you can vary it a little bit. If you want more onion, you want less onion. It's up to you. So I'm just going to saute that just for a minute. That going. And then you will need about 1 cup, which is about 4 ounces, 120 grams of potatoes. Just want to cut them in little bite-sized pieces. I'm using a russet. I mean, you could use a Yukon Gold, whatever you like. I did peel mine. Well, you could leave the skins on if you're using some type of potatoes. So now what I'm going to do is turn this down to medium-low, and I'm going to saute this until the potatoes are tender when I pierce with a knife. You don't want them mushy. You don't want them to break down. That's why you want to use a potato that'll hold up. And I want the onions to be nice and cooked. It smells so good. And I am going to, now salt and pepper, really to taste. I find potatoes, when they're fried like this, need a lot of salt and pepper. Yum, yum. Okay, so just, you know, stir it occasionally. If you find the potatoes are sticking or the onions are sticking to the bottom of the pan, just add a little more oil or butter. So this will take maybe 10 minutes. Okay, so that's done. A little hot. Remove it from the heat. And then I'm just going to double check. Just take a knife. Poke it in. Actually, I'm going to try one. Tender, but not mushy. So, as I tasted that, I thought, you know what, that needs a little more salt. Now, there is, if you wanted to, you could deglaze the bottom of the pan with a little white wine or red wine. I'm not against that. But, so what I'm going to do is I have my sausage in a bowl. I'm going to add my mixture, and then we need to let this cool down to at least room temperature. But what I'm going to do is cover it and chill it in the refrigerator. And when that's done, we will assemble our turnovers. So we are now ready to assemble our turnovers. So what you will need is, we need an egg wash. So you need 1 large egg. Just put in a bowl and whisk that. And then I have my filling that's cooled down, because you don't want to fill turnovers with a hot filling, because then that will melt the puff, and we don't want that. So that ready, filling ready, and here's our puff. So I take 1 square. Important thing is not to overfill them. I know there's a tendency you kind of go, not enough filling, but it is. So I'm just using a tablespoon of filling, and you want to put it almost in the center. Make sure you get a little potato there and spread it out like so. And then take a pastry brush, and we want to brush all the edges with the egg wash. So, and then take 1 corner, we're going to make triangles, and over this side, and the reason we put the egg wash is so we can seal it. I like to actually do it this way. So kind of take your fingers, and you want to try to get a bit of the air out as you're doing this, and seal. Get a little sausage on my hand. Okay, like so. That looks good. And then, I mean, sometimes you see people taking the tines of a fork and pressing down the edges. I don't want to do that, because when these bake, what I want is the edges to puff up, and then I can see all those wonderful layers. So what I'm going to do is I just have a skewer, and I'm just going to do a decorative edge. So with my 2 fingers, I'm just going to go along and press in like so, and that will seal it. But yet, when it bakes, you're going to see that it's going to puff up, and we're going to see all the layers that puff pastry. So there we have it. Let's make sure those are. And then, so what I'm going to do, I like to just put it back on my baking sheet. And I'm going to brush the top with some more egg wash. That helps with browning, gives it a really nice glaze, shininess to it, like so. And then you can take either a knife, or I'm taking a razor blade, and we want to cut some slits. I like to do one and then kind of one there, and one kind of decorative pattern. And that way the steam can escape. And then if you want, I got some sesame seeds. Put it over the top, like so. And that is our turnover. Now I'm going to carry on, do all the rest, and then I'm going to cover this and refrigerate them while I preheat my oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 200 degrees Celsius. Now, just a little thing. If you made your own homemade puff pastry, what you can do is freeze these unbaked. So what you would do is, once you've done them all, put them on a single layer on your baking sheet, put it into the freezer, and then freeze them until they're nice and firm, and then take them out and put them in airtight container, plastic freezer bag. You want to freeze them first in a single layer so that when you put them in a container, they don't all stick together. Now, if you used that frozen puff pastry, you can't, because you're using frozen and then you defrost it, so you can't like refreeze it again. So it's only for your own homemade puff pastry. So that's what I'm going to do, and when we come back, we will bake our turnovers. So we are now ready to bake our turnovers. Everyone's oven is a little different, but I find it takes somewhere between 35 and 40 minutes, or until they're golden brown. I do rotate my baking sheet front to back about halfway through baking so it's nice and even. And also, if you have, as soon as you put your turnovers in the oven, if you have a convection, or also known as a fan oven, reduce your oven temperature to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. If you have a regular oven, which means the burners on the elements on the bottom of your oven, reduce your oven temperature to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 190 degrees Celsius. But either way, it will take somewhere between 35 and 40 minutes. Okay, so our turnovers are done. Aren't they gorgeous? Beautiful golden brown, and as you can see, separated into lots of puffy layers. So I'm going to let them cool. Put your pan on a wire rack and let them cool down, and then we will come back and try one. So let's try our turnover. Oh, you see the filling, you see all the layers of puff. So cut it. First, there is nothing like puff pastry that is made with just butter. I mean, the flavor of that is just so wonderful. And along with the flaky, all the flakes, so good. So I do encourage you to make your own puff pastry and use that Blitz puff pastry recipe. And then, that pairs, puff pastry can be used sweet, savory, and the puff with the sausage and the potatoes and the onion, it's just so good. You can have this, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, and it's good warm. I've baked a lot and then put them in the refrigerator, and I've eaten them cold, and they're still really good. So I urge you to try this recipe, and until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of JoyBaking.com.